This video is kind of a return to the foundation of worth effort in their classroom series. And this semester we are talking about wood turning. And so far we have talked about, the tools and stuff, and we've covered one main gouge, the spindle roughing gouge. Well, this video, as the title says, is all about spindle turning, the most important niche of the wood turning world in my mind for beginners to get onto, because your learning curve will progress so fast if you just spend a little bit of time here. And I am going to take somewhat of a radical approach in educating new woodworkers in that the second tool we attack is going to be probably the scariest tool to most of y'all. Now, when I got back to start editing this video, my first draft of the video, it was over 4 hours long, way too long. My second draft was still at 3 hours. My third time through, I got a little bit less than 3 hours, which, if this was back in the VHS DVD days, that would be a good value video that people would purchase if you had interesting facts all along, which I believe this video has. There's very little that I cover repeatedly over. There's little nuggets for every minute of that little bit less than 3 hours. But on YouTube, people would look at the timestamp and never even give it a chance. So I've broken this video up after the fact into 3 different videos. The first one, we're talking about the unique aspect of the tools and the gouges in spindle turning, plus a deep dive into the unique ways we use wood in spindle turning. The second part, we do the concepts of the tool that we're using. We're actually practicing cuts and stuff like that. And the third one is just for fun. I give you a few options for exercises you can do to get better quickly and get paid at the same time. So I hope you enjoy this series. I hope you'll watch it all the way through. And remember, it's always worth the effort to learn. Great stuff, and share with others. Welcome back to Worth the Effort Woodworking and our progress through the Turning Basics series. We are probably going to do something kind of radical for those that are learning, and I'm doing it for a very solid reason. We're going to be progressing from the basics at manual turning and going straight into spindle turning. And the reason why I'm saying that is time and time again, not only me saying this, but other people, is if you get a good solid foundation in spindle turning, the rest of the wood turning craft, boxes, bowls, offset turning, all that kind of stuff is going to be so much easier. You will make such a huge leap up the learning curve, learning the basics of spindle turning than any other time in your turning career. And that, I want to say it's a fact, but time has shown that over and over and over. If you go and start out in the other arenas, you're going to be skipping so many muscle memories, learning opportunities, ability to improve your skill that translate directly to those. You're never going to be able to master them. Just learning the basics of the spindle is so important. And the other reason, well, there's kind of a saying in the wood turning world. You make bowls for the show, but spindles for the dough. And if you're starting out in this craft, I want you to be able to at least earn some money to buy some more tools to progress of it so it's not a drag for you, and have fun. And frankly, if you're making a little bit of money, it's oftentimes more fun. Another thing about this particular video that's going to be kind of radical to a lot of y'all is I'm taking a leap that I believe will progress you up that learning curve even steeper. We are starting with the one tool that undeservedly has the harshest reputation out there. We are going basically from the easiest tool to use, the spindle roughing gouge, to the hardest tool to use, the Skew. Welcome back to Worth Effort Woodworking. Let's get you learning. if you're new to the Turning Basics series, my idea is that this is kind of like a semester in school. This particular class, I would say, would be for a sophomore, junior, with at least one, maybe two classes that you took as a prerequisite. I have a prerequisite course, a series out there that goes through a lot of the fundamentals of woodworking, no matter what area you go into. Power tools, hand carving, wood turning, cabinet making, what that kind of stuff. There's basically some general terminologies, some ideas that go all through it. And that's talking all the way back to how wood grows and what edges are and how to sharpen, stuff like that. If you've never been to this, even in a series, and you're just starting out in the craft, I highly suggest you visit that series. But if you consider yourself a sophomore, junior year level, been doing it for a while, feel free to jump right in. There might be a few things I talk about that I might reference back there. You can always go back and look them up. This series basically started out on wood turning, and we covered the machinery, the lathe, all the accessories that go with the lathe, how to sharpen stuff, and the first kind of turning we did was on the mandrel turning. And that's basically a variation of spindle turning where you drill a hole and you have a piece of metal that kind of keeps it stabilized, keeps it very simple, I want to say. And there are a lot of people out there that go down the path of mandrel turning and spend their entire careers on that. It's a very, very niche. But if that's what you're doing, there's so many other areas of wood turning that you could be exploring that I highly suggest you at least try. Now, spindle turning is basically turning between centers, meaning the tree grew up, we cut it down, we turned it on the side, and we're spinning it around that axis right there between a point that's a drive side that's spinning here and a live side that's just kind of holding it up. We squeeze those together, and then it rotates around, and we can spin right there. There are a lot of unique things about working with the grain in that orientation that we've got to discuss in spindle turning. Now, the foundation tool of all turning, if you've seen my 4 cuts video, which I'll put a link to down below right there, is the skew. Every other tool we use is just a variation of the skew, which is one of the reasons why I think it is so important that we just dive deep in, jump into the deep end right here and now and learn this tool, because it will apply to everything else. And the body mechanics we used it, the little touches, the feels, the vibrations, the dampening, all that stuff that we do with this translate everywhere else. And if you don't have those skills, a lot of times you can pick up something like a spindle gouge or a bowl gouge and make it work, but not to its utmost potential. Won't get as clean a cut, won't have as many variations of cut you can do, because you might not just have that feel, that muscle memory that you learn with the skew. And this is kind of one of those things that about our craft that I just don't understand, because it does seem that everyone expects that they can go out, buy a tool, and become an expert using it right from the get-go. And that's why I think it is unfair that the skew has a bad reputation out there as being hard to learn. It's simply because A, you didn't have the facts of how to use it right from the get-go, and B, you didn't do any amount of practicing. I mean, you spend an afternoon and you can get very competent with a skew. It's kind of like riding a motorcycle. You learn the basic mechanics. You can operate a motorcycle safely. You can't exploit a motorcycle like a MotoGP racer drifting both tires around corners at 120 miles an hour. But that's what, continued practice and long-term experience allows you to get to. You put a little bit of effort into this and you can operate it safely, effectively, and make it do what you want to do. Just maybe not to the level of somebody that's been using it for 20 years at the cutting edge. It's kind of like golf in my mind. You just go out and buy a set of golf clubs and go to the driving range and start swinging it. Not only are you going to damage the golf clubs, you're probably going to strain a muscle or something like that. You're not going to be able to do it very well. But you just go out and take one lesson with a golf pro, you're probably skilled enough to at least go do a round. Yeah, your score is going to be in the triple digits, but who really cares? You're not going to hurt yourself, you're not going to hurt the golf course, and you're going to have fun. a little bit of effort, and you can start having fun with the skew. And guys, if you didn't catch that, that's kind of educator speak that you're going to be doing a little bit of homework after this video. Okay, so real quickly, let's take a step backwards. As I said earlier, spindle turning. We have a tree. We basically chop it down right there. It falls over. We stick this on the lathe and turn it around its long axis. That's spindle turning, right? Well, that is really oversimplifying it. Because in spindle turning, we have to use a certain part of the tree in a certain way most of the time. In spindle turning, stability is a key. We don't want a long, thin piece of wood to warp over time or even move while it's on the lathe. Hence, we only use wood from a certain part of the tree. Now, if you're a bowl turner, this crotch section right there of the tree, oh, that is gold. You got some nice flame going on. You got some really good character and stuff like that. Awesome. Even for cabinet making, you're putting a floating panel in. That piece of wood's going to be wild. It's going to be moving around. It's just a gorgeous piece of wood. We don't want that for those very reasons in spindle turning. Also the fact, branch wood, that kind of stuff. Yeah, we can make bowls, boxes, all that kind of stuff out of that wood. But as a spindle, there's so much reaction wood in it. There's a lot of weight going on that kind of finds the equilibrium. So if you take the top of a little bit of the top of the branch off, it's actually going to fall down because it releases some pressure. If you take more off, or actually that's exactly, it'll come up because the bottom is actually pushing it up. If you take some off the top, it'll pull back down because the tension, there's just a lot of tension in there, and we can't use that as spindle turners. So basically, you take about a foot below the top branch. That is all wood that we really don't want as spindle turners. Same for the root system. The roots have a lot of tension involved in it, or the base of the tree. And that involves tension. Once you release tension, you get movement. We just don't like that. Plus the fact that grain isn't very straight. When you start getting down to the roots, you start getting grain that kind of curves on you over a very short section. So typically, about 2 feet above the ground is more wood that we're not going to be using as a spindle turner. So that just leaves this section of wood that is just prime for us. Why? Because it's got nice straight grain going all the way through, and it's very consistent. Now, one very cool thing for us is we don't really have to worry about how wood is cut from the board. You know, if you have a flat sawn board cut from the tree, you know, the grain is kind of going sideways and it tends to warp up and down. We don't care. We don't have a preference for quarter sawn grain wood, which is very stable for cabinet works, that kind of stuff. And if you get this kind of bastard or rift sawn, doesn't really matter, because no matter where you are in the tree, if you draw a circle, you're going to have grain that runs across. It's always going to look the same no matter what we do. So in that aspect of consideration of grain, we don't really care. We do have one problem though. Whenever we go buy wood, especially if you're buying it from a country lumber mill and stuff like that, a lot of times if they get a very big branch, they might try to do something like a cut some boards out like that. You know, we might not be able to tell too much when we're doing that kind of stuff, but that's actually not very good for spindles. Because remember me talking about reaction wood. If you have a log where the pith is way to one side or the other, that is generally from a branch wood or from a tree that was leaning quite a bit, because it had to grow a lot of cells underneath, like on a branch, to support those fibers up. So you get these long grain patterns on the bottom and very thin on top because it's not having to support much up top. It's all being pushed down. But that does mean that as we're turning and we have a circle and we're removing more from one side than the other, well, we're removing equally. So it's going to tend to warp on us. And then it could get offset and go round while we're turning it. So this is kind of the stuff we want to look out for. When you're buying lumber, you don't want to buy lumber from somebody that uses branch wood or trees that were growing on a hill or something like that. A lot of times we can't tell. I say that because most of us spindle turners, we don't need to go out and harvest our wood like a bowl turner or a box turner, stuff like that, to get certain grains in certain parts of the tree or get logs that are big enough. A lot of times we are purchasing our lumber pre-dried because that's important, because if you're turning a wet wood, it will tend to warp a little bit as it dries. We want to get the wood as close to equilibrium as possible before we turn it so that we know that the final result will be right. And that's important in spindle turning because a lot of times we are making repetitive stuff like banister rails, that kind of stuff, supports. And if you have 100 that are perfectly straight and then one that's kind of curved, it's really obvious, okay? So we just want consistency. Consistency in grain and consistency in dryness. Hence, we typically buy our materials. I do suggest, if you're buying, go to the rough section. You don't need to buy processed wood because you're just going to be cutting it off, but you just do want it to buy it dried properly. And when they dry it properly, most of the time, they're going to start cutting logs like this. You absolutely positively never want this, center section around the pith. No matter how that is always going to be trash. So when I'm processing my lumber, I try my best to get something fairly thick so that I can then come over and cut little squares out of it to create the individual blanks I'm going to be using for my spindles. But once again, it doesn't really matter if the grain is bastard sawn or rift sawn or quarter sawn or anything like that, because we are going to be turning it around. It will all equal out. I point that out now because grain consideration can cause frustration. For example, I have a nice block of wood. This would be what I would consider a nice quality block of wood. Can you see the grain on it? Can you see its focus? It's nice and straight going all the way across in all directions. The problem comes when you get something like this right here. Doesn't that look like that's going to be a premium wood? But then you turn the grain over on the other side, and can you tell that the grain is kind of angling almost from one corner to the other right here? What happens is when you're turning a piece of wood, and these are round pieces, here's your live center and here's your drive center, and the grain is perfectly all the way across, well, you can get that turning as thin as you want, and it will be as flexible as it can be, and it will maintain its integrity. Because the grains themselves will kind of flex, but they'll stay together. Wood's very cool like that. It will flex all the way to its breaking point, and if you don't pass that breaking point, it will always come back to the original position. It's not like metal, which will come back almost all the way where you leave a dent. That's one of the coolest things about wood in the construction industry. But that strength comes from the grain. If you have grain that is diagonal all the way across like that, and I'm doing an extreme example, and all of a sudden you do the same exact thing where you turn it thin, look at where that grain is right now. In that very short path, its strength is there. It's not going to flex. It starts to wobble for any reason, and it is just going to snap in half. So maybe you're pushing a little bit too hard, or you're making a nice, pretty finial. Everything looks perfect, and then the piece just falls apart. Chances are the grain was going in the wrong direction. It's also why we turn the tree lengthwise instead of up and down over like that. It's because of the grain. We're taking advantage of the strength of the grain and not letting its weakness bite us in the ass. It always comes down, no matter what branch of woodworking you're in, to understanding the grain. And speaking of that, how about a little spot for our sponsors, which is me. Are you one of those woodworkers that doesn't enter your workshop without a good cup of joe? Or leave it without adding a little bit of that Irish special sauce that you got stored in the back drawer? If that's you, then have I got a workshop product for you. A genuine worth the effort workshop coaster designed not to protect your woodworking from your beverage,
but to protect your beverage from your woodworking, all the while keeping you focused on what you should be working in this craft. Available down below in the description or at the website wortheffort.com. And guys, I really do want to thank y'all. Over the years, I've been a horrible YouTuber. We're supposed to ask for, your subscriptions, likes, and comments and stuff like that. Because back in the day when people were really seeking out sponsorships, those kind of things really made a difference. They make a little bit of a difference now, but not so much, simply because how the environment changed. But for smaller creators such as I and others, your direct patronage, either by buying our products, such as that little silly swag or some of the woodworking I do, and other people create stuff that they market to. That's the only way a lot of us survive to continue to make content for y'all. So, trying to be a little bit better YouTuber, asking for that kind of stuff, and thanking y'all because it makes a huge difference. Now let's talk about the tools we actually use in turning. What's kind of cool about going down the spindle turning craft is you really don't need a whole bunch of tools. We've already talked about the spindle roughing gouge in our other series of getting started, where we did a little bit of mandrel, because this was the only tool we really needed to do that kind of cutting. Obviously, I have a special kind of spindle roughing gouge. Most of them are tanged, and this is a tool that you only use on spindles. It can be very dangerous to use on other areas of the craft because of the design of how most of them are. That's why we are kind of trying to get away from calling it a roughing gouge and specifying a spindle roughing gouge in the craft to really drive that home. The other gouges that a lot of us use are what they call a spindle gouge, and what makes it different from most, like a bowl gouge, come on, focus, is the depth of the flute. Obviously, we can shape it all different ways and stuff like that, but generally it is above the halfway point on the flute, whereas bowl gouges typically go deeper. And I have mine set as a fingernail grind. Come on, focus. Which means the wings are a little bit swept back and that kind of stuff. I'll get into this a lot more in a future video, because in this video, we really want to focus on the skew. Oh, I also forgot one of the most important tools in starting spindle turning out. I am always using a good awl, which is a basic nail is all you really need to accomplish the goal of it. But having a really nice one is kind of fun. And this is just a simple mandrel turning kit that's widely available all over the place. So in that first little section, if you went through and learned mandrel turning, you can make yourself a fancy little awl if you want for the rest of your wood turning career. Now, for the idea of, just an edge on the end of a steel stick, there are a lot of variations of skews out there, and there are a lot of people that are going to tell you one's better than the other. I'm not going to do that at all for one simple reason: physics. And I'll get into that in a section. But before I get started, I thought I'd show you the collection of skews that I and my dad used, or at least purchased. These are the 4 that I found in my dad's collection. I'm not sure how much he used them all. I can tell you this one probably came from his very first stuff that he bought. It doesn't look like it's been used very much. The grind is kind of fresh. But here's something I want to point out, because you see a lot of store-bought skews are like this, no matter if they're the high-end crowns or that kind of stuff, is their alignments. A lot of times they are not in line right here. They're kind of wonked off one way or the other. This one actually is pretty straight, which I find pretty rare at the low things. But when you go this way, it's kind of canked off to the side. That doesn't make that big a difference, probably in overall, but it's just kind of weird when you're rotating, and it's kind of rotating around like that because it's offset. You really want it to be able to rotate around a center point. And this is what will fight beginners when they're starting out, is just the alignment of the handle and blade. Just something to keep in mind. Now, this is one that I made my dad from a piece of crown steel, and you can see the difference. A lot of them are basically blank steel, blank plates, just high-speed steel that they just put a bevel on the edge. I can see right here that he hand ground this corner a little bit, which is something a lot of us have to do to make it work. This one right here is one that I bought from Thompson Steels. You can kind of see the label right there. And you can see that, like a lot of them nowadays, they're going ahead and grinding a perfect curve around the edge, which is super, super nice on the low side corner. But you want a nice flat on the high side corner. Here's another variation, but also notice that it is straight bar steel. Here's one of Alan Lacer's signature ones, and he custom makes them. It too, on the low side, has a nice curve on it, but also notice how his tapers out over the length of it. It starts out thin and then gets thicker as it goes back. So it was carved from a big old square stock of steel and made this shape by grinding down. He also has another one that didn't even know he owned, and it's made off of a round bar stock. Can you kind of see that? Focus camera. Can you see it came off of a round bar stock? We'll talk about that later on. My personal collection consists of four of them. I will tell you, I have this thing right here. You probably see it come in a lot of those kits. They call them pen turning kits. It's just a little skew, and then give you a tiny roughing gouge and a tiny little spindle gouge, and then probably a tiny scraper. Don't buy those. I think they're utter crap. This thing is useless. This caused me so much headache because I was led to believe you need a small skew to do tiny work, to get in on the grooves and stuff like that. No. The smaller the skew, the smaller the sweet spot. It just causes more problems. Plus the fact they're so thin that they vibrate. Don't waste your money on a thin, small, tiny skew like this. Word to the wise. My three main skews right now consist of this monster one from Alan Lacer. It's a bigger version of what my dad has. I get a lot of value out of this skew for a lot of the work I do, making really thick mallets, large table legs and chair legs and stuff like that, really thick stuff, because the thickness of it means I have a longer bevel at a consistent angle. So it's just more forgiving for large turnings. And I use this a lot for wasting away material in what's called a peeling cut. And we'll talk about those later. This is one of my favorite tools. I use it constantly. I doubt I've worn away an inch of its life in over a decade, I'm saying. I made the handle on it. You can just buy the steel, though he will sell an entire handle right there. I just don't like how his tapered down to the point. I like a little meat on the back. Anyways, I really like this thing. I would not recommend somebody buying it for their very first skew. For my very first skew, which I still have and I still use, is this one right here. It's a 3/4 inch one. It was a Crown high cryogenic one and stuff like that. Funny story is, one of my very first videos was me taking the advice I gave y'all. When starting out spindle turning, I jumped in and started with this tool rather than all the other tools like scrapers and spindle gouges and stuff like that. I wanted to learn this based upon the advice of people I knew. And the very first video I did was me practicing my skew skills by making a bunch of screwdrivers. I don't have any over there. They're in a thing. I made a whole bunch of screwdrivers. I gave my dad a set, and I kept a set. I called the video "Screw the Skew." And it's probably one of the first videos I actually did that did halfway decently. I'll put a link down below if you want to see how far I've progressed as a videographer and that kind of stuff. And it was done in the quarter of an efficiency department on a little mini lathe where I built a little stable table around with a curtain on it so I could have a vacuum air cleaner right behind me. I would actually turn in the corner of my apartment. Anyways, I took the chisel that was in that and I've highly modified it over the years. You can see how much of the base that I've ground off of mine. You see that? To turn it round, because it came square, and I had to put it in my own handle because the handle that came in the high dollar crown was off to the side. And I didn't realize that when I was starting out, and it gave me some headaches. This one right here, I've got dead centered. Making your own handles allows you to control that kind of stuff. I use this mainly with my top making because I like the shorter handle just for cutting the tops off. That's the one cut I do with this thing, is just removing the tops from the stock. My main skew for the past, I don't know how long, has been a 1-inch skew. This is the skew I expect all of y'all to buy if you're watching this video and starting out and don't have a skew. Just get a good quality 1-inch skew that has a nice rounded base from the factory. Don't try and do it on your own. Come on, focus. See how it's rounded on bottom, flat on the long tip. Those two elements are really important. Also get one that's a little thicker than, a 1/4 inch or something like that, that has some meat to it. Don't worry about the shape right here. We'll talk about that in a second, why. But getting yourself a nice one, really beneficial. There are a lot of manufacturers out there that can give you one. The one I personally use is Thompson. I know a lot of people swear by the something and Sons, Carter and Sons out there. A lot of the people that have their signature tools are probably they're basically putting their own grind on either a crown, one of those cryogenic ones, or one of Thompson's or Carter and Sons. All of them are good, I think. Most skews will probably last you a lifetime if you're an average user. So don't worry about spending, $70, $80 and getting good steel. Good steel will maintain its edge a lot longer than just regular high-speed steel. And in this instance, that's more important than any other tool out there, even the bowl gouge. So good steel, good shape of the bar stock, rounded, flat, and then we'll talk about that bevel now. Okay, concerning skew geometry. If you are just starting out, you have one skew, and you're wanting to learn that thing, I'm just going to cut to the chase and tell you what you should do right from the get-go, okay? Go ahead and put a 70-degree angle on the bevel, okay? Simple as that. It's a very traditional angle. You'll see a lot of books and stuff like that reference it. A lot of us base our modifications off of that standard. So it works. It's proven to work throughout history, okay? The other angle is this angle of the edge right there. Problem is, everybody seems to reference that angle and talk about it differently. Some people talk about the angle in terms of this angle right here. Other people tend to talk about the terms of this angle right here, and still other people talk about it in terms of that angle right there. So, okay, my opinion, don't even worry about it, okay? Just sharpen it to a level where this distance right here is 1.5 times this distance right here, or close to it. That will get you close enough. The deeper you go down into it, those angles change, and I know a lot of people will say you need a certain angle for a certain type of wood. It's kind of like with hand planes and normal woodworking. A lot of people that use a lot of pine and softer woods, they like a really low angle because it just cuts easier, it works better, all that kind of stuff. But if you're working with a really hard wood, you want a steeper angle so that the edge is a lot stronger and you don't get as much tear out. So there's pluses and minuses, but the key thing is, most people on their hand planes, they kind of fall into a 45-degree angle. And that 45-degree angle average is kind of what this 1.5 represents. So if you're starting out, that's my suggestion. But now I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into the other geometry aspects so that you can make an informed decision of what you want to do as you watch all of us out there, because we all have different opinions. Now, in terms of the skew of the self, you're going to hear these terms used quite a bit. You're going to hear about the long point, and that's the tallest one up, and the short point. The long point is always on the top of the chisel. The short point is on the bottom of the chisel. Now, you might be using it this way, but that's still the top, okay? It's just how we do the terms, so don't let that point get too confusing for you. Top, bottom, long, short. Now, in terms of the relative angle over there, I've said 70 is probably the most common you see out there, but you will see a lot of people advocate for different degrees. I know one of the most popular ones out there advocates, I want to say he sets his at 85 degrees, but that's about 80 degrees in my diagram. And I know that my original crown that I kind of modified over the years, it came in at a really steep 55 degrees. And there are pluses and minuses of all of them. But here's some kind of basic geometries I want you to think about. Look at if the wood is coming straight at these edges, okay? And every one of those edges has a same angle right there, okay? Well, the steeper this angle gets, the farther the distance from the cutting edge to the end of the bevel is. So in effect, the steeper that angle gets, the sharper the edge gets. Let me break this down for you. An analogy I showed in that prerequisite course, I'm just going to revisit. You're on a mountain. You're skiing down. Okay? Right there. The steepest you can go is straight down that mountain. The angle of the mountain doesn't change, but if you want to make it less steep, what do? You go across it like that, right? It's less steep when you're going sideways across that angle. Well, the more the relative angle is up, you're going up that mountain at the steepest angle. That is the shortest distance. But if that bevel distance is the same and you're going across it, well, all of a sudden, that becomes longer. Just as this is a longer line than that. Even more here. So in effect, when you get that steeper relative angle right there, you're lowering the angle of the cutting edge. Now I mentioned that going back to that analogy with using hand planes. Hand plane users that are on very soft woods, they like a very low angle. Hand plane users using hardwoods like a higher angle, and obviously that 45 is somewhere in the middle. But the cool thing about a skew is we can change that angle at any moment in time. And you will develop a feel with just a little bit of practice where you can say, oh, I can feel some tear out. This is softer wood. Maybe I can lower that angle down, increase the sharpness. Maybe I can increase the angle a little bit just by moving the back of the tool, because the wood's motion is the same. It's always turning in the same direction. We can control our angle of attack of the edge with the grain, which is why one time when I was watching a video of a really great wood turner and he was talking about the advantages of the steeper angle, I was sitting there thinking, okay, Jesus, how can I word this? That guy was skinny. I ain't. If I'm using a tool on the side of my body, by nature, that angle is over on the side. If you're skinnier, you can bring it in a little bit. So while I might like this angle working it, that's because my skew is over the side. If he's a little skinnier and he wants to bring it in, well, he has to have a different angle up here to get the same results I do. The presentation angle is what he likes. He wasn't taking into consideration that, some of us are just fat. And I only bring that up to you You've got to take that kind of stuff into consideration when you're looking at this learning content you find out there in books and stuff like that, because you have to think about, how am I using it? And if you're having problems with something, the results aren't the same, and you feel like you're doing the exact same movement, maybe taking into consideration different things. The height of your tool rest, the position you have with your body, all of that affects the edge of this tool, because this is one of the few tools that we have so much control on the interaction. The other thing I want to talk about is the shape of our edge. You will see a lot of people that advocate for a rounded skew or a shaped skew, and I am one of them. But it's harder to learn with it for no other reason than sharpening. The skew is the simplest tool to sharpen out of all of them when the bevel is straight. But when you start adding that curve in, you have a little bit of finesse, and we will get to that right there. But sharpness is more important than geometry or anything like that in the results you're going to get. So when you're first starting out, I would highly recommend you start out with a straight skew so that you can get the best chance of good quality results from the get-go. But some of the advantages you have with a curve skew all comes down to physics. A curve is longer than a straight. So this edge, I have more distance to work around it. I have a larger sweet spot, and we'll get to that in a second. And that kind of stuff compared to a steadfast. But when you do curves, we still talk about the angles we do our curves in reference to a straight line, because that curve right there is still on a 70-degree angle when we reference it, okay? The shape of the curve, you will also find some people that like a very straight top coming over, and then about a third of the way over, they curve it right here, and then come down. But this distance, once again, when we're talking about it, they reference it as that 70 degrees. And they might say it's just got a straight or flat or anything like that. That right there is because you can then use that skew as a parting tool to waste away a lot of material really, really fast. I kind of go in that theology myself, but as I said, I'm fat. When I brace the tool against my body, it's a little bit farther over. So my personal design, and the one you're going to see on all of my skews, and once I got comfortable with it, I've really never changed from it. I'm comfortable with it. It works for me. I have no regrets with it, so I don't go back and forth to all these designs. That's probably the way you will be. In fact, a lot of y'all might start out with a straight skew and never go on because it works. But in my personal design, I've got it straight at a slight angle and then curving over. Simply because when I want to present it, I present my edge perpendicular to the rotating wood to get that peeling cut. And I'm fat. Oh, coming back, I skipped over a little bit. We were talking about the edge of the tools and how they were measured. I told you I recommended that you take this distance right here and make sure it is 1.5 times this distance right here, and that will give you a very workable angle. But you also hear people talk about the angles that they use to be referencing this angle right here, which is a combined angle of those two right there. A lot of times people will talk about that in the 40 to 45 degree angle. Sound familiar? Kind of like a hand plane. Then you will hear people talking about more this angle right here, and probably one of the most expert people out there. In fact, that's going to be my bonus in a second. Alan Batty, Stuart Batty's father, he advocated anywhere between 55 degrees for hardwoods. Remember, some people have different angles for different things, down to 20 degrees for softwoods. That is a radical difference. I mean, we're talking the difference between this right here and this right there. Pretty steep, okay? But he did it professionally and he was trained the classical way. I follow a lot of YouTubers out there, and it seems like a lot of them have said that they've gone back and forth, and they've kind of settled on something between 22 and 25 degrees, and they just stick with it for everything. It's what they've become comfortable with. That might be the fact because, remember, by changing the back angle of your handle, you can affect the angle that the wood is being presented to the edge. Since I mentioned it, I'm going to take a break right now and talk about the bonus for this video. I usually do these at the very ends of my videos, but it's one of those things. I did my tagline, I signed off, then went to black, and a few seconds later, they popped up, and everyone was clicking away once I said my tagline, so nobody really saw them, so I'm going to start introducing them into the middle of the video to force you to see these bonuses, because I think it's well worth you knowing about these other content creators. Alan Batty is the father of Stuart Batty, probably one of the greatest educators out in the turning world right now, though he kind of specializes in bowls and forms and stuff like that, and I assume it's just as a rebellion against his father, who specialized in production, spindle turning. But he was one of those things that grew up in his father was a turner and grandfather was a turner, and they grew up in the traditional apprentice master educational system. So a lot of the way he talks about wood turning is from that unique angle that we don't really appreciate nowadays. He has a video online of a VHS tape that they put on. So it's a entirely different format. It is well worth your time to go watch it if you're going to dive deep into Skew. I'll put a link over here or down below to that video. Go check it out. It's worth the effort. The last thing I want to talk about the anatomy of the Skew is the handle. For most of your work, you want the handle long enough so that in use, you can brace it against your body, okay? Because your body is what's going to stabilize all your movements. Moving with just your hands is very difficult. By having a brace on the tool rest, a brace of their body, and actually moving your legs, you'll get much smoother cuts. Moving the body is a dampener that eliminates a lot of vibrations. So having a long handle that you can brace on your body is very, very nice. I will say this one tool I talked about that I only use with my spindles because I only do one cut. It does have a fairly short handle, and I could see even having a shorter handle on it because all I'm doing is right here. I'm not really doing that kind of rolling movement with this tool. So I consider this a specialty Skew because the handle is so short that it's not as useful for the other stuff. Another reason why this thing is pure crap. Next up, I do want to talk about sharpening your Skew because it truly is one of the easiest tools in your arsenal to sharpen unless you've got a curved edge. I don't have a straight Skew, so I'm going to just use a straight grind on one of my dad's scrapers to show you the techniques, okay? Once you notice, I have a platform right here. This is what I use for my bowl gouge, and you'll see these lines on there that I have drawn at 40 degrees, okay? That's so that I can come up at any point in time and find my angle right there fairly easily. So if you want a Skew that is 70 degrees, I suggest you get whatever tool rest you want and just make Sharpie lines at those angles of whatever you want. That way you can consistently come back here, just place it down and sharpen away. No big deal, and it'll be the same on both sides. You won't ever have to worry about it. And when you're sharpening it, it's basically you just find whatever angle you want and you just put your finger up underneath the ledge because the ledge is theoretically parallel and it'll just keep you at that same angle going across. Flip it over, put your finger underneath your ledge, and it'll keep it at the same angle going across. Really, really super easy. The wheels, I would have at least one that's 180 grit, and that's all you will ever need. Having a coarser one is really nice if you're shaping your tools, but a single 180 grit, that's kind of the grit that a lot of us have kind of fallen around in the turning world as the optimal. I do have a much higher grit over here because as you gain practice, it removes less material for the sharpness, and I sharpen quite a bit, so that lets my tools last a little bit longer. But for most woodworking tools, 180 grit or even a 220, if you want to go a little bit more extreme, is perfectly fine. And that's perfectly fine for a skew. You can take straight from the grinder and turn on the lathe, and it will work adequately. You can get a little bit better results by honing it, and I'll show you that in a second after I show you how I sharpen a curved one. Now the issue with the curved sharpening is the presentation to the wheel has to be at 90 degrees to whatever the angle is at that point in the curve. So if you're looking, at a curve, like right there, where my fingernail is, that's about plumb right there. That's going a little downhill, that's a little going downhill. So I want to touch it at that plumb area on the grinding wheel. So as I'm moving around my curve, that's what I'm focusing on. Is the curve touching the wheel at the point where it is perpendicular to the edge? So because my front section right here is flat, I've got a little bit of a straight angle, so I can do that just like a normal skew, where I will turn it on, bring it up, and move it side to side. But right about here, when I want to sharpen the rest of that curve, you'll see me put a lot of pressure down, and I'll rotate it around that point instead of moving side to side. And then come around the edge. Now for me, when I'm sharpening, I'm just trying to remove the metal in the middle. I try and leave a little flat on the top and the bottom because I like to hone. Now when I hone, I have this little slipstone that I bought off of Allen Lacer. It's a diamond stone or cubic stone CBN, or I don't really know what it is. It's abrasive. It's about 600 grit, but you wear it down fairly quickly, so it's probably a little bit higher now. But there's no reason why you couldn't just use one of those cheap little, card scrapers like that, or even sandpaper on a board. I do know that Alan Batty, in that video I recommend, he uses straight screws all the time, and I think one of the reasons why is he likes to go to oil stones and sharpen them up just like he does one of his hand tool chisels, which means he's getting up to, 4,000, 8,000 grit equivalent at those levels. So, it's a different mentality. Your skew will work straight from the grinder. It might not the edge might not last as long, but as you saw, it's just a few seconds on the grinder, so you can always resharpen at any time. Now, when I sharpen, I basically bring the plate up to the top, and I keep it on this bottom bevel. It's constantly touching that bottom bevel, and I will pivot. And I might touch the edge every fourth or fifth time, but that's all it really needs. I just need a light touch on that edge every now and then. The reason why is I don't want to come over where it's just touching the edge and not that bevel, because that will create a micro bevel, which will affect how the tool works. So I'll come over here, and you'll see me in my videos. I touch it to the bevel. I just start rocking it back and forth, and then I'll occasionally kiss that edge. But all my pressure is back here. And you can do this on a straight edge too, but I like it because I can do it right at the lathe, and it just takes a few seconds. And as you can see, now I had ground this all the way to the edge in the example so that you could then see the shiny spot that I developed. And that's as far as I need to go. Some other little tidbits about sharpening these things is if you took my advice and you bought some good modern steel, not just high-speed steel, just one of the powder metals or the M2s or something from the brands I mentioned, you don't really need to worry about losing the temper on the steel like a lot of my hand chisels and stuff like that. I will freak out if those even turn to a straw color on the grinder, much less purple, which means I need to cool them down and bring them back. I don't like that, okay? But with our turning tools, if they turn purple, back off a little bit, but don't stress about it. When it changes to that purple color, that's about 1100 degrees, and I believe these things don't start losing their temper until like 4000 or something like that. Somebody can look that up and tell us down below in the comments what the exact number is. But it's so far higher that you'll be burning your hand before you do it. I mean, if you just got your hand right here and it starts to get warm, back off for a little bit. No big deal. I have been told, even though I haven't always done it, is don't quench the steel in water because it can develop micro fracks. I've never seen that before. It's kind of one of those heard it from a stranger that a little part will fall off in the middle of a turning because it's got micro frack because they quenched it all the time. I don't know about that one, but that's a warning out there. So I've just kind of avoided quenching my high dollar tools if I can. So that's enough about the Skew. How about we return to the lathe and talk about some of the unique tools or accessories that go with spindle turning. In spindle turning, you will also hear reference to a drive side and a live side. The drive side provides propulsion for the stuff. The live side just kind of holds up and stabilizes the other end and applies pressure into the drive side. And the other key tool at the lathe that we have to concern ourselves with is the tool rest. So let's talk about those three elements. If you're just starting out and you bought a lathe, a new lathe and stuff like that, it probably came with something like these right here for a tool rest. They are iron tool rest. I kind of think that they put these in your kit with the purchase just because they'll get you by, with the idea that they know you're going to be upgrading. These are really kind of crap. They're made out of iron. They can break on if you get a really heavy catch, which I have seen before, but it is fairly rare. But the worst thing about them is they make the user interface difficult because they're so rough from the factory. You hear that? That's going to affect your cut every single time. Those vibrations get magnified into your work. So you have to take a mill file to them and really sand them down and get them nice and shiny and smooth. The other thing is there are multiple points. So your pivot point changes sometimes in the middle of a cut, which not good, okay? You want a single contact point. The other thing is this bottom section right here is what's called a finger rest. And the idea is you slide your hand on it. These things are so rough, they will actually wear your skin off over time. So then new users, I don't want to touch that. That's not good. You want something smooth and slick to slide on. Make it sexy. That's why an aftermarket tool rest is really one of the first upgrades to your lathe I would recommend to you. I'm a kind of fan of Robust just because that's what I've been using for a long time. And he basically shapes a steel nice and smooth so that your hand can slide on it all day long. You don't have to worry about it. And a very hard piece of steel on top that is nice and smooth. These will dent over time, and even some of your tools that have like an edge to them will scrape them so that they become wavy. This is harder than the turning tools you're using, so you're not really going to risk damaging that, but it can be easily ground with a hard mill file if you need to. I just prefer these over what comes stock, and there are other manufacturers that make variations of these. For spindle turning, you just need a straight one. The longer a straight one you have, the longer you can turn without having to relocate your tool rest. And I do know a lot of professional wood turners that will actually get custom ones where they can put on two different banjos and basically have one bar going all the way across their lathe that they just maintain all the time. It works out really well from them. That used to be kind of a production technique, is they'd have a tool rest going all the way down the shop with multiple people working on different lathes, but just one tool rest. So a nice, straight, long tool rest will serve you just fine, long enough to do enough work that you'll feel happy. And a lot of times in turning, we are working on the live side and working our way towards the drive side. So you can work on a little section right here, finish it, move over, work on this section, finish it, move over, if you can't afford a really long tool rest. Next, let's talk about the live side. This is generally my go-to. Can you see that right there? It's basically a cone and put it on, and it runs on a bearing. And if you can see that bearing right there, I have a hard time with these. I tend to go through a few of these. One maybe every few years I buy them because the bearings just wear out on them. And on this particular one, I have a hard time with that cap spinning off. So I've actually got it hot glued on right there. They're just a little bit tricky live, but you got to admit that these things are spinning, probably doing 10, 20,000 miles of distance. So for 20 to 50 bucks, you're getting good use out of them. They come in a lot of different varieties. Of this right here is probably what's going to come with your lathe. It's called a cup drive. And as you can see, it's got a center point in the middle that centers it, and then that ring that puts all the pressure around it. That right there is basically a callback to the old styles, because they used to not spin like this. You used to fill this little cup with grease, and that would prevent it from burning, or wax or something like that with the bearings. The issue I've always found with these is I'm just clumsy and I drop them. These tips are really fragile and they aren't replaceable. So I've bought a few lathes over the years. That's why I have so many of these, but about half of them are just damaged beyond use. The other style you will see commonly is these ones that have these screws on. And what's cool about these screws is not only can you use them as a cup drive, but that you can also put different attachments on them. So like if you have a bowl or anything like that, or a lot of times I'll put this with a tennis ball, and if I'm just wanting to apply pressure with the drive on the end. They work pretty good. This one's my dad's, but I'll admit I don't use this very much at all. Really, this is what I use all the time. And this little section right here, a lot of times you can buy them where they're aluminum, so you can actually turn it down to a point if you want, if you lose your point on there. That point is important because you want your live side to line up directly with your drive side in the middle. That's a sign of a good quality lathe, that everything's set up. If you don't have a good point, it's hard to measure that. The drive side, on the other hand, that's where a lot of opinions and controversies come into effect. What your lathe is probably going to come with is something that looks like this right here. It's just either number 2 or number 3 Morris taper. That's how they are rated on. And your lathe is either going to have likely one or those. And then just a center spike that kind of centers it, and then some drive fangs or whatever you want to call them. A lot of times the center spike's missing on this one. A lot of times they come with a little screw on the side so you can adjust how deep that center spike goes. Let's see if I can find one. Like mine right here. This is the one I use all the time. It's the same thing, except it fits into my chuck, so I don't have to take my chuck off of it. But it's still got that center spike and a bunch of biting fangs on the side that occasionally you do sharpen up. Okay. The other style is kind of what, I don't know if this is the official term for it, but I call it kind of a safety drive. And they come in different sizes. Let me find one that's not been modified. Okay, like this right here. It's got that same center spike, but then it's got a ring, a circle. Can you see that? That circle is sharpened, so it will bite in. And the friction comes from just the pressure of the live center squeezing it onto that little ring. And the advantage of that is it allows for some slippage. It's kind of like a clutch. So if you get a really bad catch, well, the force of that catch will actually cause the wood to stop spinning. It's generally spindles aren't that heavy, so they don't have a lot of momentum. And it'll just spin on this one, so that power isn't transferred back into your tool and thus into you. I know I just see online a lot of people, when people are starting on the Skew, the instructors are recommending these to them. Intellectually, it sounds really smart to me, and I would suggest you try it. I just don't. I get frustrated with these things. They just slip way too much. A lot of people have that same opinion, and what they will do is they will take their safety drives, and then they will kind of etch into the end. For they'll start out with every quarter, and then they'll keep adding on to that until they get something that's totally serrated, so that will grip a little bit more. And then you had people that came out with this style right here to do the driving. That's basically the same thing, a safety drive with a bunch of serrations, but you can see that the serrations are kind of angled a little bit. So the drive, it encourages it to slip rather than bite too much for you. So that's kind of what you do. You also have smaller versions of those fang style ones. If you want to use that, you can do all those the same. For almost all my spindle turning, that's what you're going to see me use right there. Just a nice 4 bang sight. I will say in offset turning, some people like using these ones that have 2 fangs on them because it allows for it to kind of slip a little bit, whatever the angle they want. I've just never really found a use for this kind of stuff, but you will see them out there. Some key things, though, you do want to look out for on these right here is I will occasionally take a file and sharpen those edges just so that it will bite a little bit cleaner, because it's the pressure that pushes it into wood. And if you have a hard dried wood and you're pressing into the hardest part of the wood end grain, you just want that little edge to kind of bite. So now let's talk about setting up your lathe to spindle turn with those items we just discussed. Some things about the tailstock. You kind of have to watch out for situations like this because we are constantly moving these around, and occasionally little bits of sawdust will get underneath it and it will affect the stability. You could get a little vibration. So occasionally you just need to make sure to take it off and clean it out so that you don't have anything that's building up, and turn these things over and look on the underside because they kind of compact on the other side, because basically shaving gets underneath and then we squeeze it down with this thing so it compresses and it just stays up there. So occasionally just take this off, clean it off, especially that underneath section, so that you don't have anything that's going to cause it to be unstable. The other thing is the tails, the Morse taper right here. Wood turners are notorious for having one arm that's all scarred up because we leave those sharp little points over here and we're constantly hitting it. It's always on the top of the arm if you can tell a wood turner that way. So a lot of us end up taking these things off, and when we're bowl turning or anything like that, if it's over here, these collect a lot of dust and schmutz and stuff like that. And what's worse is the taper, if we don't clean it out, it just kind of compresses down in there over time. And that makes these things less stable because they aren't lined up just perfectly. So occasionally you need to clean that out. They sell things like this right here, which you can stick in. It's got a little spiral on it. You kind of have to extend it out so it bottom out. And then you just kind of twist it to really get that stuff out. It also helps to squirt a little alcohol in there to swell up any fibers that have been compacted in there for these kind of things. But however you do it, with a rag that you push all the way through, things like this, or just pure liquid, occasionally clean that out. I generally do that one whenever I'm starting a big spindle project. Now on the flip side, if you use the Morse taper style drive where you're still pushing into the hole just like on the tail side, it is even more critical to clean that out, because a lot of us will go back and forth between chucks and those kind of styles. So there's a lot of crud that develops in there. Even something like my chuck right here, which is in constant use, you can see the sawdust kind of builds up. So I'm about to mount in my drive center, which is just a clamped in version. But before I do that one, I need to clean that out. And most times I can just get it with a little blower. And then I'm going to take my drive, and you can see the clamping action happens right here. This right here is kind of a back brace to make sure you line everything up and push it all the way in. So what I'm going to do is, you can see I kind of line it up and I push it back where it stops. That stopping is happening on this silver part of my chuck when I push it in, and that's when I've got it nice and registered all the way back, is when I clamp down on it. You can get these misaligned if you don't watch it, and that would mean that the drive point won't be centered perfectly. Just make it nice and neat. So before use, make sure your machine is ready to be set up for spindle turning. And obviously, before you start, you're going to collect the tools you're going to use on that project. Spindle turning, you can pretty much guarantee I'm going to have these three: a spindle roughing gouge, a spindle gouge, and my skew. And I like to keep them on my lathe. I'm working up top. It's just easy to grab them from underneath. Some people don't like this setup because they knock them off or something like that. But in that case, just go buy yourself a little stool right here. And I keep it, and this is kind of the stool I use for tools I use at my lathe, because they can just fit right here, and that they're within an arm's reach of me using it. I don't even have to move. Non-movement is kind of how I got this shape anyway, so you can optimize however you want. Maybe you do want to put them across the shop. But the other thing is, because I put them down my lathes, I always have a towel right here, just so that they don't vibrate and stuff like that. A lot of times you can't see it because it's covered in shavings. I just thought I'd point those two things out. So there we go. Machine set up. Time to load up a piece of wood.